All right, everyone, welcome back to the World of ETF Investing Canada Virtual Expo. MoneyShow is pleased to welcome Steve Hawkins. He's the president and CEO of Horizons ETFs, a member of the Mirae Asset Global Investments Group, where he's responsible for the day-to-day business and affairs of the firm. With more than 30 years of experience in the industry, Mr. Hawkins has been with Horizon ETF for more than 12 years. He is partly responsible for the proliferation of ETFs in Canada, bringing many first-of-their-kind ETFs to market. Mr. Hawkins spearheaded the launch of the first family of actively managed ETFs in Canada, the world's first marijuana ETF, and the world's first global equity ETF driven by artificial intelligence. He is frequently quoted in the news media, appears regularly on business television, and is globally sought after for his speaking expertise on his three favorite topics of ETFs, derivatives, and cannabis. He was recognized as CEO of the Year 2008 Wealth Professional Awards and is the current chair and of the Canadian ETF Association. Steve, thank you so much for being here. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you very much for having me here today on the Money Show. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you've been enjoying the other speakers so far. Today, we're just going to talk about ETFs. Please send in your questions when you want, and we'll try and address them at the end of the presentation here. I'm just going to hit you off with some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. What's going on in the ETF Canadian landscape? What are people buying out there? How thematic ETFs are changing the ETF landscape, and some of the key themes that we believe that you should be watching with respect to ETFs and the market generally. So in Canada, sorry, hold on, guys. I forgot to hit my timer for me, so I have an idea what's going on. Anyway, in Canada, we have seen continued ETF success and growth at an exponential level relative to previous years. This year already, we're up almost 25% from a growth perspective. Last year, we were up 30% on a year-over-year basis, and that really number has been increasing pretty substantially over the past several years. And looking back on how much ETF growth there has been really in the Canadian landscape generally, we've doubled in less than 4 years from a size perspective. And the number of ETFs has continued to increase. The number of providers has definitely slowed down over the last few years, but really every leading Canadian asset manager and bank is now in the ETF marketplace here in Canada, and hence why we've continue to see a number of ETFs come to marketplace. Looking at what Canadians are actually buying from the ETFs perspective, we have equity generally. It's been leading the charge. This was the case last year as well, whereas in the previous year, fixed income outclipped equity slightly in 2019, but 2020. And so we've continued to see a resurgence of equity over balanced funds, over fixed income funds. And really a lot of this is driven by the market and the market dynamics. What is going on in the marketplace right now? We see interest rates at a standstill, inflation not really moving around a lot, and we see equity returns significantly outperforming all other asset classes generally. So guess where the money is going? It is going into equity. A lot of that is broken down into Canadian equity, to US equity, to global equity, emerging markets, into developed markets, and thematic specifically, whether they be North American driven or global. That all fits into that equity category. And a lot of this is broad-based, but a lot of it is varying other degrees, which includes thematic ETFs as well. Fixed income, Canadians are the highest fixed income investors in the world. We're very home-centric from that perspective. We don't expect fixed income to ever be zero. There's a lot of money that goes into balanced funds on a regular basis. So when you look at multi-asset as an example, these are ETFs that provide exposure to a broad range of different ETFs underneath them, which includes equity, balanced, conservative, growth types of portfolios. We launched our HBAL, HCON, HGROW. You've probably seen the commercials on BNN. These are fantastic performing multi-asset ETFs. One of the big surprises of obviously 2021 was crypto and the ability for Bitcoin and Ethereum to create, for sponsors like us to create a Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF, bring those to marketplace. And we've seen a huge amount of money that was pent up demand, people that weren't going out there and buying the crypto asset themselves directly, the digital asset through a digital broker or whatever. They're being able to buy it through an ETF. And we've seen this huge amount of money come into crypto assets this year in 2021. We don't really treat these as thematic specifically. It is a new asset class, but it is something very, very different than the traditional asset classes. And inverse leveraged types of ETFs continue to do well from a raising money perspective. I mean, this is a very small part of the ETF ecosystem here in Canada, but really it is when you have a conviction on a specific type of underlying asset or underlying index per se, and you want to take a short-term risk on something like that, people are betting on inverse and leveraged ETFs to get that exposure and or to hedge their exposure. So we're going to talk a little bit about thematics and what really is a thematic ETF. And there's a lot of varying degrees on what people throw into the various different thematic ETF buckets. When you talk to any of the bank ETF analysts, you're actually going to get a different breakdown of what is a thematic ETF. But generally speaking, we look at demographics and the healthcare trends as very, very thematic. So looking at the marijuana, the psychedelic sectors, which, again, Horizons launched the first two ETFs in the world off in those asset classes. Alternative sectors, so very new, exciting, different types of things like travel and leisure, not a traditional asset class. When you're dealing with banks or you're dealing with gold stocks or energy stocks, I mean, these are the traditional asset classes. When you get into pipelines, a subsector of energy, this is a little bit alternative. When you're getting into infrastructure, it's a little bit of a different non-traditional asset class. But some of the things that are emerging, lithium, uranium, we entered both of those markets in the ETF space this year, in the past year, and both sectors have been doing extremely well just from a pure performance perspective relative to oil stocks or gold stocks or silver stocks. So very, very new, exciting alternative sectors. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And then we have emerging technologies. I mean, what we have seen in the past 16 months with respect to tech and what has happened to tech and this huge run up in tech and tech-based ETFs, people not wanting to bet on individual names, they're betting on access to an underlying theme or tech-based theme like cloud computing, like blockchain, like robotics, like AI. All of these themes are very, very interesting. I mean, I love the space theme. I don't think it's going to perform very well, but I think it's a great emerging technology from a thematic ETF perspective. Sorry, just to highlight some of the things for you, like the growth of thematic ETFs in the US specifically, which is the biggest marketplace in the world for ETFs, is up almost 250% on a year-over-year basis. Our sister company in the US, Global X, is up from the lows of March 31, 2020. They're up over 500%, and they're almost a pure thematic US ETF based company, which provides exposure to a lot of different global themes. But when you look at that growth of a thematic type of companies, just the amount of money going into themes, theme-based ETFs, it's just astronomical in the US, and that has a waterfall effect into Canada and the Canadian ETF investors as well. And Canadians can really buy any North American listed stock or ETF very, very easily with a single click in your discount brokerage account through your investment advisor at any time they want to. Themes in Canada, I mean, there's really, again, this is subjective, but there are really over 40 listed ETFs, pure thematic ETFs in our personal view, with over 3 billion in AUM, closer to 4 billion in AUM right now. A lot of these provide exposure to various different Canadian focused asset classes, as well as a lot of currency hedge exposure to a lot of global type of themes like the robotics, like the blockchain. And Canadian ETFs themselves have also over doubled in size and outpaced broad-based equity significantly from a growth perspective on a percentage basis, not from a pure dollar AUM percent. There's a lot of money that still goes into pure beta, S&P TS 660, S&P 500, S&P Composite, NASDAQ 100. I mean, these are all huge broad-based themes, which in Canadian investors significantly put a lot of money in every day. Some of the largest Canadian themed ETFs in Canada, I mean, when we look at it, the Horizons Marijuana Life Sciences, HMMJ, the first marijuana ETF in the world, still one of the largest Canadian themed ETFs out there. But look at, you see the global water, global agriculture, infrastructure, cybersecurity. You know, we saw a huge run up in ARK last year from the US perspective, and Emerge has launched the ARK ETF here. We see the Harvest Travel and Leisure. I think this is these are great underlying themed concepts out there. You have innovation, you have robotics and automation. These are all very exciting themes when it comes to the Canadian ETF marketplace. And a lot of these can be considered to be, these are Canadian property. That's the one really nice thing you need to understand. When you see a Canadian ETF that is off of robotics and automation, this is Canadian property. When you buy the comparable ETF, which is in the US, you're dealing with US property. You're dealing with a different level of taxes that you have to deal with. You're dealing with different levels of reporting to the CRA. You're dealing with estate taxes that potentially can affect you. There's all these. It's why Canadian investors really need to focus on buying Canadian ETFs that provide exposure to the right theme that you're looking for. And if you can't find the right theme from a Canadian provider who provides US or global exposure, please send us an email. Please send us a message. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I would like to invest in. Steve, can you help me out? Yes, we can. Some things that you should really consider when you're looking at thematic ETFs generally is they should not be your whole portfolio. You should really be doing this from a concept perspective. Asset allocation, diversification of your own personal portfolio is extremely important. You've got your core portfolio. I mean, I keep a lot of broad-based equity stuff in there. And then I like to play around on the sides with respect to what I want to invest in right now from a theme perspective. Sometimes I'm using leverage inverse leverage. Sometimes I have a longer outlook with respect to a specific theme, like robotics, like our 4 ETF, which has performed fantastically over the past year, RBOT, which has performed fantastic over the past year. We launched a new ETF, BBIG, which provides diversified exposure to 4 primary underlying themes, specifically with respect to biotech, Internet of Things. These are types of ETFs that you need to look at when you're looking at very specific. You can get very, very granular. You can get somewhat specific, or you can get very, very broad-based tech when you're looking at NASDAQ 100 as an example, which is a great index to invest in generally, but it doesn't really give you themed exposure. But you need to look at it from how much of your portfolio do you want to risk on thematic ETFs, because it really should be a satellite exposure perspective. Some of the pros and cons that you need to think about, again, looking at diversified exposure. When you're looking at themed ETFs, there's a lot more single stock risk, okay? So it's much better than buying the individual stock, because you don't know what that one stock is going to do in this one sector. What one marijuana company is going to do relative to the other marijuana companies. Much better to own a marijuana-based ETF that provides exposure to 30 or 40 marijuana companies rather than putting all your eggs in one basket. You've heard that from your parents over and over throughout your entire life. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's what we're also saying about thematic ETFs and thematic investing. It's very, very tough to pick the individual winners. Buying the ETF really helps diversify that risk. Investors can purchase that ETF instead of the underlying stocks. When we run an ETF, we have the ability to lend out those underlying securities. We have the ability to manage the tax efficiency of the underlying portfolio themselves. We can provide additional income to you as part of that ETF, and which helps offset some of that risk. It helps provide some income for you down the road. And most of the themes that are in Canada that are from a global perspective have currency hedging built into them. So if we have a US dollar exposed portfolio, we are really hedging that back to Canadian dollars in most circumstances so that you're not taking on additional currency risk on top of that stock-based risk. Some of the things that you have to think about, again, because you're dealing with less names in these themed types of ETFs, you're dealing with more volatility generally than the broader markets. Broader markets are, in that word, broad, because they are exposed to a number of different securities, a number of different sectors. So when you're dealing with the S&P 500, when you're dealing with NASDAQ 100 or TSX 60, there's a lot of, these are broad-based sectors that provide exposure to a large gamut of individual securities across all the different sectors generally, and which includes some thematic names in those, but they're not thematic-based ETFs. Thematic ETFs should not be a core holding, primarily due to the high risk in them, and you're dealing with higher management fees than when you're dealing with broad indices. These are, when you're creating a theme ETF, there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot more management to it. These are very differentiated from an ideas perspective, and ultimately the fees are slightly higher. And what you need to really pay attention to is, like, one of the ETFs that was missing off of this page, as an example, was TEC, the TD technology ETF. This ETF, when you look at the underlying holdings, looks almost exactly like NASDAQ 100. The performance looks exactly like NASDAQ 100. It's charging a significantly higher fee than you would have to pay on the NASDAQ 100. But this type of ETF is what we look at as a closet indexing ETF. It is not really a themed ETF. So some themes that you really need to consider that are going on, especially like Canadian home-centric themes, obviously marijuana, which has been around since 2016. Marijuana stocks have been trading very, very actively. HMMJ, we call this the S&P 500 of the marijuana industry. Everybody looks at HMMJ as the index to beat if you're investing in marijuana stocks. It's been around for a very long time now. This is the bellwether when it comes to marijuana investing in Canada. We have our US only marijuana ETF, HMUS. So very similar to HMMJ, but it only invests in underlying US marijuana companies themselves. Charges a little bit higher fee on it, listed on the NEO exchange due to the uncertainty around the legalities of marijuana in the US. And there's certain rules with certain exchanges here in Canada, and we have to select those exchanges based on that basis. Some things that you should really need to know is, like, can marijuana sales take off? From where they are here, they continue to increase. Marijuana companies are now profitable in many, many jurisdictions in Canada and the US. Sales continue to increase. The different versions of CBD and THC that you can get, the different types of delivery mechanisms. Now we're dealing with rolled cigarettes, but vaping. It's not just all about getting the marijuana and hand rolling your own cigarette anymore. There are so many different ways that the marijuana industry continues to evolve and make new sales, bring on new clients in that circumstances. So the full legalization of marijuana in the US, we believe, will at some point significantly impact the marijuana industry itself. Just looking at performance, looking at it on a one-year basis as of the end of August, marijuana continues to perform extremely well on an overall basis. It had a great fall, early spring, though it has trailed off in the last 6 months, as you can see from a performance perspective. Some of the things that you need to think about, we love big data, we love blockchain technology. HBGD, which is previously was our blockchain ETF, but it really transformed into a big data and hardware ETF. We love blockchain. We love the infrastructure for blockchain. HBGD is an ETF that provides you the exposure to the underlying infrastructure of blockchain. We believe blockchain is here now and is going to stay forever. And all of the banks continue to invest in blockchain. All of the big investment dealers continue to invest into blockchain technology. It's not all about Bitcoin. It's not all about Ethereum. It really is about building the infrastructure for blockchain itself. And that's where HBGD comes in. So if you look at crypto, which people consider to be the new gold, you can see the performance of Bitcoin versus Ethereum versus gold. I mean, this past year has really provided you the opportunity to make a significant returns when you're investing in crypto assets. But you have to be wary of crypto assets. There is no underlying availability to use crypto in any way, shape, or form at this point in time. And whether or not, regulators around the world will allow a borderless security or borderless currency like Bitcoin or Ethereum to actually survive is a big question mark. Right now, the only way that you can sell Bitcoin or Ethereum is really if you have another buyer of Bitcoin or Ethereum that wants to buy it from you and pay that new price. So again, it's a limited supply. So as there is more buyers than sellers, you're going to have the price increase. And that is really what we've seen in this past year. But really, again, you cannot use cryptocurrency for any other purpose. Gold is really a store of value and has so many other purposes and availabilities from an efficiency and market perspective. And how can you sell your gold? I can go into my guy around the corner and I can sell my gold at pretty much whatever I want from an asking price perspective relative to the market price of gold. So very, very simple to sell gold, but it's a very, very long-term store of value, very, very different from Bitcoin and Ethereum, which really has no true store of value at this stage. Some of the things about investing in the blockchain technology ecosystem, I mean, some of the companies are out there. There is, for us in BB in HBGD, we're really looking at the blockchain and cryptocurrency type of companies like the Galaxies, the Hives, who are mining or selling. You have Riot Blockchain, which is a big broker. Then you're dealing with sort of semiconductors and what goes into the infrastructure of blockchain ecosystem. Again, you're dealing with the Intels, the NVIDIAs, the chip makers out there. And then what you're dealing with also is the storage, and big data needs more storage at all times. And that's where you're coming into the Westerns, the Digitals, the Equinoxes, who really can help support this ecosystem behind the scenes. All of these companies have done extremely well over this past year. All of the companies listed here, again, one of the reasons why HBGD has done so well. Here we go, just quickly from a big data performance perspective, the 1-year returns of our ETF really up 157% relative to the CAD-based index that we're tracking. And again, this is a passive ETF. We invest in the companies that are produced, but this is global big companies that are in the big data and blockchain infrastructure ecosystem. Some of the things that you need to think about when you're buying Bitcoin ETFs, again, there's been a lot of money that's been rolling into cryptocurrencies. I mean, the SEC has been talking about it for a while. They still haven't approved a cryptocurrency, a digital cryptocurrency ETF. But with the launch of Bitcoin futures and Ethereum futures on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, that has sort of opened things up. I mean, we launched our own Bitcoin and inverse Bitcoin ETFs. I love Bitcoin as a trading vehicle. As a long-term investment, I'm a blockchain believer and I'm a blockchain investor. But from a short-term perspective, I love the volatility of Bitcoin and Ethereum. This is the new volatility. I mean, we have a volatility ETF as well. But if you want to get in and get out of something, you want to try and make a quick buck. You think that Bitcoin is up 20% today, and I think it's going to go down tomorrow, then you buy BITI. You want to buy inverse Bitcoin. If you see Bitcoin drop by 20% today, 20% tomorrow, 10% the next day, you think, okay, Bitcoin's gone down enough right now. I think it's going to go up the next day. Then you're buying HBIT as a long exposure to Bitcoin. But you're doing these things from a short-term trading perspective, from my perspective. Bitcoin is not a long-term investment at this stage until there is really a true use of Bitcoin and acceptance of Bitcoin from a global perspective. This is really just a trading vehicle. It is a very volatile underlying asset class. You need to know that when you're going into it. Just an example of what's going on in Bitcoin versus the ETFs versus closing versus buying direct. These are the different types of exposures that you have to think about. When you're dealing with a closed-end fund and ETF, these are RSP eligible. When you're trading on an exchange, obviously you're dealing with intraday liquidity. When you're dealing with funds, you're always paying a management fee. And premium discounts is something that you really have to pay attention to when you're dealing with digital Bitcoin ETFs or Ethereum ETFs. You're really likely paying a higher premium discount relative to where the liquidity providers are making a market, because the liquidity providers are trading futures against the digital currency ETF to hedge those ETFs. When you're dealing with a futures-based ETF like HBIT or BIDI, you're dealing with a futures-based ETF. So a market maker trading futures against a futures-based ETF really provides a substantially tighter bid-ask spread on a reasonable basis. Some new evolving technologies, obviously, in the healthcare system, psychedelics. I mean, we love psychedelics. We launched the world's first psychedelics ETF earlier this year. We've now seen a couple of new products in the US and the UK start to come into the space. One just launched in the US, I believe, yesterday or today. But, psych is really a novel, exciting, new, potential healthcare solving problem type of ETF. This ETF really provides underlying exposure to only psychedelics companies. There's some companies that do some marijuana, some psychedelics, but when you're dealing with magic mushrooms and LSD, ketamine, these are all forms of psychedelics. We have this listed on the New York Stock Exchange, but it owns companies from NYSE, from NASDAQ, from TSX Venture, from the CSE. You have companies, the big companies in Canada like Cybin, MindMed, Field Trip, Red Light Holland, Celos. All of these companies, they're extremely young companies. They have a lot of drugs that are in testing at this point in time. The only one that really has something out there that is approved in the psychedelic space is Johnson & Johnson, which has a ketamine-based nasal spray. But we see some exciting news coming out of the psychedelics industry almost daily. And as soon as we see the first FDA or Health Canada approved psychedelic drug that comes out based out of psilocybin or LSD or another ketamine-based product, I mean, we believe that this psychedelic industry is just going to blow up and blow up very, very quickly. There are so many therapeutic opportunities for psychedelics, with almost 1 in 4 people from a global perspective suffering from some form of mental illness, dealing with addiction or eating disorder, severe depression itself. These are very, very important parts of our society at this stage. And to the extent that we can bring drugs that are not over the counter, but that are prescribed and can be delivered to you by a medical professional and can help you from a therapeutic opportunity perspective, there is so much opportunity here with psychedelics in the medical community itself. Some of the other things that are going on, we're talking about alternative energies. I mentioned earlier that we launched lithium, we launched uranium, both of these products performing extremely well. Recently, we just launched a hydrogen ETF as well. So alternative energies is a theme that we really believe is something that people should be paying attention to. The world needs energy every single day. Oil is running out, natural gas is running out, coal is running out. We need alternative energies to sustain our life, our societies as we see it right now. So we believe that all of these alternative energies will continue to do well in the next phase of evolution here with respect to our societies. Lithium, as an example, trades on the TSX. Very, very simple. Invest in lithium-related compounds. Dealing with mining, exploration, extraction, processing. Hydrogen itself, again, dealing with hydrogen-based fuel cells, the production of these types of underlying energies themselves, the components, the systems that all go into hydrogen generation for energy itself. Some of the companies in there like Ballard, Lind, so dealing with battery power, battery storage with respect to hydrogen, what's going on there. So we have some pure play and some non-pure play in there. Uranium, which is something that we love. We've been the only Canadian uranium ETF for some time now. Significant performance over the past year as well, but dealing with mining, milling, and conversion, fuel fabrication, and depleted uranium. So, we need a lot of exposure to nuclear energy on a going forward basis. And where are you getting exposure to that? You're getting exposure through uranium itself and the use of uranium in the production of nuclear energy. So mining and exploration of uranium is something that we really firmly believe in. The supply is really coming out of Europe and Asia for the most part. And that's where our portfolio is really highly concentrated from an underlying uranium perspective. Just as some example, the other two ETFs, HLIT and Hydro, are under 1 year, so we can't show you the performance, but on HURA, 1 year performance, 80% basically. Something that you need to pay attention to when you're looking at a theme like that. Again, some of the key themes that you need to look at, features of Thematic ETFs: growth, whether it's Canadian or global, disruptive technologies, and limiting the risk in your underlying portfolio itself. And with that, thank you again for listening today. I don't have a lot of time left, but if I can answer any questions quickly, I would love to do so.
All right, Steve, thank you so much. Out of all those alternative energies mentioned, in your opinion, what has the most potential right now?
Right now, I truly believe that lithium, as well as uranium, provide the single biggest opportunities for alternative energy right now.
All right, thank you. Have time for one more here. Is it better to own the equities when seeking blockchain exposure or the currencies?
Or the currencies. So we truly believe in the infrastructure of blockchain itself rather than the currencies. The people will continue to have to build a blockchain infrastructure out there in all facets of our economy right now. With the underlying cryptocurrencies themselves, we just don't know what the future holds for them. We just don't know how they're going to be used. So we want you to invest in the technology that is going to be behind blockchain and the use of blockchain going forward. If you're betting on the cryptocurrency, you're just making a bet. If you're investing into blockchain technologies, you're making an investment.
All right, everyone. Well, we are speaking here with Steve Hawkins, President and CEO, Horizons ETFs Management. You're watching the ETF Investing Canada Virtual Expo. Steve, brilliant presentation today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you to the Money Show for having me.
Have a great one.